Yeah, hi, welcome everyone to Innovation Matters. I'm here today with Lamont&Dirk, and we're going to share some reflective thoughts about our visit to South by Southwest Sydney. The first one, I think it was, Lamont, is that correct? Was that the first one in
First one
Sydney?
in Sydney, yes.
And you've attended others?
Yeah, in Austin, yes.
Yeah. So the way we thought we were going to go about this is just keep it simple, and we're going to share some general observations on how it is to attend this in Sydney, because it might be a little different from the experience in the U.S. in Austin, and then we're going to kind of organize our thoughts a little bit by three themes like surprises, the inspirations, and then also the concerns that we kind of developed during the conference, because technology always comes with some level of concern. So surprised, inspired, and concerned is sort of the theme. So start by asking Lamont, how did you, just easing into it, how did you feel about the organization and stuff? How did this whole thing hit you on the first day?
Oh, I thought it was great. So thank you, Dirk, for having me, and thanks for reminding me that we had this conference. Otherwise, I might not have gone. But no, I think for Sydney, I think it was great for the Sydney of Sydney. It's great for me also to just understand what's going on in the Sydney landscape in terms of the tech space a little bit. I mean, I'm not much into the film or music scene at the moment, but just to see that energy, that was great. Is awesome to see everybody convene again after COVID, just around the ICC and the Darling Harbor, and I actually took my kids on one evening to see it, and they're quite impressed with all the little booths, and of course they're most interested in the Porsche exhibition booth because they're into sports cars. But yeah, overall it was a great venue. I think the one thing that could have been improved, and I think you probably, or most people would probably agree, is these are expensive tickets, and you weren't able to get into all the meetings that you want to get into. The rooms were not all, obviously they have different sized rooms, but a lot of the events were hosted in smaller size rooms, so there's typically a waiting list, or you had to wait in line, and so it wasn't ideal if you sort of had to do back to back to backs. So you'd probably have to like miss one and get to the other. But I think overall the quality of the speakers were quite good. They weren't, yeah. So anyways, yeah. Maybe I'll just leave it there for now.
Yeah, so you mentioned something important that pertains to me as well. I had the tech and innovation badge, so I was kind of focused on that and not so much. And we should say that for people who listen to this and consider going, the vast array and range of events is just it's pretty mind-boggling, and
It's
probably
overwhelming.
probably too much for one person. So making a decision, I think, is not too bad.
Yeah.
Making a decision for one track is not, you're not gonna miss out, because I don't know if a single person would even be able to take advantage of all of the streams at the same time.
Even one stream was like more than
Yeah.
enough, and the two of us could cover.
Yeah.
The two of us couldn't even cover everything.
And
Yeah.
you already kind of alluded to this a little bit. So after the first day and being shut out of a few talks that we actually wanted to go to, like being like 5 people in front of us, they basically closed the line and said like no more, room is full. That was kind of a bit devastating.
Yes.
When you're looking forward to getting into an event, and then we kind of developed our own style, maybe a little bit of a gangster style.
Yeah.
And maybe for future attendees, maybe this is helpful. What we did is we kind of, it's not always the friendliest way, but it's possibly the only way to make it happen. Is we left the talks that were scheduled for an hour maybe 10 minutes early and made our way over, and then got in line, and that was really the only way to secure a spot, because the places and the venues were so limited. And then from day 2 on, it really flowed, and it really worked for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know, if we had one word of towards the organizers and stuff, maybe making sure that the attendance and the capacity of the events is a little better matched, right, in some ways. Because if you're paying this much, for those who are interested, we paid probably close to $1,500 for the technology and innovation badge, which is quite a lot of money for a conference. And then you want to make sure that you see all the stuff that you want to see, right?
Yeah, well, I have to give a shout out. Thank you to Professor Marianne Crouch at the UNSW Business AI Lab for giving me a complimentary ticket. So I have to give thanks where thanks is due. So yeah, so that's great. Yes,
that's good stuff.
Yes.
Good opportunity to do that here. So let's talk about those three things a little bit. Get into the content a little bit and how we kind of experienced it. So surprises, inspirations, and being surprised, being inspired, and then maybe being concerned also. And I don't have a real rigid kind of plan, but maybe you just want to hit it and stuff with whatever you want to start with: surprises, being inspired, or being concerned.
Yeah, I was surprised with just how together some of the the big industry players were on sort of the forefront of technology. Obviously, you've got Amazon, the Googles, and so forth who are at the forefront. But they were working with a lot of Australia's largest incumbents in bringing AI and machine learning and sort of considering how they might use it in their business processes. Obviously, not all of these case studies we can share, but maybe something that is both maybe more refreshing than inspired, but still inspirational is just sort of the way that the leadership at some of these companies are taking AI seriously and then not just as a hype cycle. I think one of the things I can maybe speak to was a talk called AI Beyond the Hype, and just looking at how some large organizations were exploring generative AI models to disrupt industries from fashion to logistics to retail. And it appeared, obviously, I think that, I guess the concern right now is just that everybody's still trying to figure out exactly what's happening. But they did talk about a lot of the benefits of the use of large language models for economic and sustainable AI solutions. They mentioned the advantages of sort of smaller compute sizes, scalability, and really, I think the key takeaway here is that probably the winners that will emerge from this new era, if you want to call it that, is that it's those that have domain-specific data and domain-specific applications. And so you don't need to be necessarily on the forefront of the AI algorithms to make innovations, but just sort of focus on your domain specific expertise in your business and that data set. And you can now start building actually your own large language models, and you can actually build and tune them with much smaller compute sizes than you normally would need to. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the learnings I took away from it.
I can throw in one or two kind of surprises and inspirations from the first day as well. So they're kind of not related, but they're kind of similar in the way they kind of surprised and inspired me. So the first one was about quantum computing. So colleagues of us from the University of New South Wales actually were the key presenters there on quantum technology, and I have to admit that I always thought of quantum computing being equal to quantum technology being equal to quantum computing, but they kind of actually made a point that there's also quantum sensing, which sounds quite interesting. So sensors that work with that quantum, with that the particles, or it's not particles, but things like the qubits, like carrying just more than ones and zeros. It sounded really promising, sounded really cool. And a thing that in that context that really surprised me was that even the big players in that market raised comparatively kind of small amounts of money. So the biggest players have like $700 to $800 million, which sounds a lot at first. But if you see what
comparatively,
what kind of hardware and what kind of infrastructure and stuff is involved into even solving the small problems in this area, it's not a lot of money. So it's kind of it feels like there's not the belief there yet to invest in it, and there's not the belief there. And the other thing that surprised me a little bit about that was also that the error problem is such a big problem. The error correction is really what really trips them and stuff, and that's what they're working on. It's almost like you're not, working on developing the core, but you're kind of developing with kind of the weaknesses of the actual technology. So you're putting all the work and all the effort into actually kind of eliminating the weaknesses of the technology. It felt like a little bit of a weird approach, but that's where we are with this. And the second one that really inspired me and surprised me was a talk on universal design and the unintended consequences. So there's a really charismatic speaker and really made a strong case for not designing to the average and stuff. And I thought that was really cool, like, because averages don't exist, like, really make sure that you even if you're designing somewhere between the extreme users, or if if you don't want to do that, like, find personas, find typical users, and don't design to the average. That was really kind of very inspiring to not make that mistake when you go for innovation. And so those are two surprises. What else?
Yeah, I think to build on that, in terms of not building towards the average, I think I don't know how you think about it or how the field generally thinks about it, but there's this canonical adoption curve where you've got the early early evangelists, then you've got the early adopters, and then you've got the normal distribution, the bell, the fat part of the bell curve, then you've got the laggards. So that's what's typically taught in the from an innovation lens. But I guess quite a few talks have been emphasizing that that is sort of the old way of thinking about it. Actually, you want to not necessarily, like you said, design for the average, but actually the curve is actually you want to have this beta set of users. And I think one of the design processes from an innovation point of view, or if you want to talk, I don't know if it's a playbook per se, but again, you start from the customer needs, but who you choose is to build those customer needs. You want to find those really passionate, first 100 super users, and that's sort of something that Y Combinator advocates for. But it was interesting and surprising to me that it has now percolated into the larger industry, that this is a general design process that's now coming into play. And then to reverse engineer, and I think this comes from maybe Amazon as well, where instead of building the product first, you actually start, you come up with a one-page press release, you build some FAQs around it, and then you just do some quick drafts or visualizations of what the product looks like, and you test it with those first 100 super users, where you're not designing for the average, as you mentioned, but for those really passionate fans. So that was from an innovation lens, sort of really surprising for me, at least, to see that the larger industry has adopted some of these startup approaches.
Now that closely related to what you were saying there, right, segueing right into that, was came out of a talk with really experienced designers. So these are people that do design, across the range, but they're professional designers. Like, we always think of design thinking here in the business school, we're kind of, it's almost like a method that we embed into our daily work and stuff, but these do nothing else but design. So these were really seasoned designers that have done nothing else for the past 25 years. And one message that they sent that really resonated with me was like, that is the journey, the design journey. How do you get from initial inception of ideas and stuff to something useful, and then where does that journey take you? And it's kind of cool to hear from one or two designers that what they do is they kind of almost map it out like an explorative kind of sailing journey. If you were like in the 15th, 16th century and you were with the conquistadores and stuff, and you don't know quite where you're going and where you're landing and what you're going to meet. So what they said is that it's all about the journey. So what you need is a North Star, kind of. So you kind of keep that fixed, right? You keep that fixed idea where you want to head to in the ideal circumstances, almost understanding that you might never get there. You might never fully get there. So that was kind of a very good message. And another thing that they wrapped into that is that when you do those MVPs, those minimum viable products, don't ever necessarily release them, but like keep them for testing, So on that note of small groups of customers and stuff, it's okay to pitch an MVP or show an MVP or let people use an MVP if it's kind of a controlled environment and stuff, but don't make that mistake and release that along the way. That can do a lot of damage. So those were kind of really strong messages that also relate to that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
and to build on that, Dirk, I think that's exactly what was a big surprise to me is just how far along the industry has come. The larger organizations are, starting to have this experimental mindset and this iterative process and decision making and design process. And it was, iterated from quite a few organizations. And to your point, not only do you not want to release it, but I think people from the startup world have heard this, but from the large organizations, it's not just MVP, but your minimum lovable product. So really figuring out, what's the minimum set to get, before you get to product market fit, and sort of building towards that lovable product for faster decision making, mm-hmm. and to engage with your customers. Mm-hmm. And I think that also was a big lesson for these larger organizations in sort of how do you execute on this seemingly simple idea where people supposedly embrace failure, but don't know exactly how to execute on it. And so one of the suggestions, at least from Amazon, and I believe it was possibly Google, where they like to have pizza-sized groups, so like no more than 6 to 12. And so what that allows you to do from a people's point of view, or managing organizations point of view, is you have faster decision making, you have ownership, and decisions go quicker because you don't have these big bureaucracies, and they're able to then from a budgeting point of view, they sort of review them on a quarterly or 3 times a year type of budget. And so as you're allotted a little budget at the front, but you have to titrate into 3 sessions, and then you have to decide at the end of those quarters or trimesters, do you continue along this path or do you pivot? And so it's very interesting to see that in these large organizations, they've broken down their teams into essentially what are small startups, and then they've taken a lot of those startup concepts to build innovation into these larger organizational structures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. The pizza, I like the pizza metaphor in the analogy. If it doesn't become a quattro stagioni, like
yes.
Where all the ingredients are segregated into corners and stuff, that you want a good diverse team at work. Yeah, but in terms of teams, the designer talk actually also brought about something that was kind of really surprising and inspiring at the same time as well, because I hadn't thought of it that much. Even the seasoned designers experience a shortage in terms of how designers are trained. And that kind of surprised me. Creatives in my life that always thought of themselves as almost like overeducated in their field and stuff. So these people said that, and there's 2 things here that they mentioned, 2 themes. One of them is they need to kind of re-emphasize that whatever whatever will be put out for the customer to buy has to work, be simple, and be exciting. So basically, put it into very simple frames. Like it's got to work for the customer. It's got to be simple to use, and it's got to excite the customer. That's the mission of design. And then the other thing that relates more to the training part is that they perceive kind of a shortage in terms of accessibility and security of products. How easy things are that they design are actually can be accessed by users, and how safe they are for users to interact with them and stuff. So this apparently there's a little bit of a shortage even in the field of experts there.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing that you mentioned about the shortage of designers. I think there's also a shortage of developers, which is mentioned. And one of the talks I went to about sort of this growing notion of this thing called a venture studio, which is sort of in the startup space, there are typically your incubators, your accelerators, which then feed into the venture capital system. But to sort of address this gap that you mentioned in terms of designers, I think it was a Brisbane-based group called, I think Johnson Marks is what the name was, and so they worked with a startup founder who actually started out as a professor, and once he started the startup, they did a joint venture with this design studio, what they call like now a venture studio, and then once he sold it and it got acquired by Microsoft, he became now the general manager. at Microsoft, and they were just sharing how they think that there's a gap in the market for people who are looking for innovation but may not have access to the point that you mentioned before about the lack of designers, and really critically when you want to build things is the lack of technical talent to actually build the infrastructure. They felt like one of the hardest things about startups is finding the right talent to execute on your idea. Mm-hmm. And I think on those two dimensions between design and technology, which is part of what South by Southwest is all about, venture studios might fulfill a gap where you might have a design studio or so this I haven't heard as much before. It's usually a design studio that comes in that sort of helps a technical team to build out the right user interface to really satisfy the customer's, expectations and needs. And so what they did is that design studio basically helped, first after a number of unsuccessful attempts to hire their own designers, they just outsourced it to them initially. And the design studio essentially brought them along, built their first MVP, and then guided them on how to actually hire and find out who the good designers are. Because as technical co-founders, they were not able to actually, one, identify the talent, two, understand how to recruit them, or three, how to motivate them and how to work with them once they were embedded in that technical team. And so I mean, it's sort of a newer concept, although it's been around for maybe a decade or so. But I think it's just interesting to see that model was working here in Brisbane, in Australia.
Yeah, cool. I want to jump in because you kind of reminded me of a talk later on in the week on robotics, and it relates to the workforce, right? The trained workforce in the tech space, and something that really surprised me was like that the I don't know what her title was, but the leader of Australia Robotics, it's a non-profit, right? That drives robotics development in Australia, mm-hmm. said that there's such a shortage that they and it was jokingly, so I'm gonna say this with like you can't see my face right now because we're on a podcast, but our listeners may find this interesting that they're almost willing to take anybody who can read and write, and I say that with a grain of salt, in the robotics industry, because they cannot find the bodies and they cannot find the workforce to actually sustain the growth that is happening, mm-hmm. which is surprising and also a little bit concerning, because if the growth can be there, it should be there, right?
Yes, absolutely. And talking about that future workforce, where you're just mentioning that they're trying to just get anybody that can read and write. I did attend another session on like the future of work and the future of recruiting, and I think it was with the ex-CEO of the Iconic, and who's now mm-hmm. the CEO of the Hatch and founder of both. I forget his name. I'm gonna butcher it. I think it's, anyways, I won't mention it, but we'll try and figure it out later maybe in the cliff notes, you might have it. So anyways, he was mentioning that they're trying to actually build different models to find people, not based on necessarily their experience, but their attributes, and trying to predict them based on not just the CV, but just really quick and simple mm-hmm. questionnaires, and trying to find out what attributes that a young person might have that don't show up on the CVs. And so like for a industry like robotics, what are those attributes? And so
that concept that we all have heard of at this point, because it's all over LinkedIn, SWP, right? Strategic Workforce Planning. Yeah. Everybody's heard it, nobody knows what it means, mm-hmm. but maybe that's one component of it, right? Finding and planning people based on attributes and not necessarily on classical skill sets, if you wish, right?
Yes.
That could be the future.
Yes, exactly. And I think just the last thing, just on his last point about remote hiring, and this has happened in my own class, but was also revealed in some of the discussions on the ethics of using AI to hire. It was interesting to see in the audience that, I felt like there was a discussion on the ethics of, using this. And what I found interesting was actually...
Can I cut in? Like using an algorithm or an AI, artificial intelligence, yes. to select the candidate and maybe even give a final offer or something?
Well, not provide the final offer, but for that initial screening to find out who would be appropriate to get to the, if they get past the technical stage, can they then, you have to have a human in the loop to figure out if they were culture match, mm-hmm. and so forth, and then mm-hmm. finally with the final mm-hmm. hiring manager.
That fits under concern, because we've heard that I don't know how to say this the right way, but I think there's only one way to say this, but we've heard that AI can be a little bit racist sometimes, for example, right?
Yes. So
And you correct me, but no one really knows how this happens, but it's definitely been proven that there's some bias happening in there.
well, I think obviously we still need to work. We have a long ways to go to explain how the AI works, and sometimes, but oftentimes it's due to the data set. And so if the data set is skewed towards one demographic, we'll just pick on you for now, like a white male. Yeah. And but
it happens in all directions,
yes,
right?
Yes.
That's the thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the concern here, I think a lot of people had was, will it actively discriminate me if I'm a woman of color and so forth? But actually what it turned out to be the case is a lot of the minorities and or women of color actually would prefer to have AI, because even though both humans and AI might have biases, at least the AI you can sort of start teasing apart now.
It's a controlled bias.
It's a controlled bias, which you can correct for, and you can
possibly.
trace it exactly. So that was sort of a really interesting concern that actually turned into something that might not be as big of a concern as we might think. But so that was a very interesting talk.
And maybe putting into a little more into the concern basket there, because we both attended this AI talk where there was a bit of a conversation segment about how AI will change jobs. And the concerning thing was like really that I think we were both, you correct me if I'm misspeaking on behalf of you, we were both a little bit underwhelmed with how little people had to say about this, right? So it was kind of so obvious that we walked out of the room and said, like, that's all they have to tell us, So that just to give our listeners an example here, so they talked about how will AI change the jobs of doctors, lawyers, teachers, consultants, and journalists. And I wrote down the answers, and they're kind of, if I hadn't been there, I would have been just as wise, right? In
Yes.
that talk. What was your impression there?
I think we have to understand also the audience. So just for the listeners here, this was mainly for the general audience. So maybe the way the speakers pitched it was for this general audience. But to your point, Dirk,
I'm gonna push a little bit. We're at South by Southwest, so
yes, that'd be great. Yes.
You're not expecting people who are completely new to
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I did come away underwhelmed from that talk about sort of the future of jobs. They didn't really push towards what properties or what categories were going to be displaced. And I think it's still the jury's still out. Like there's some papers now and some literature that suggests that it could actually be the lower, and I'm surprised they didn't mention this in the talk, but I'm not going to mention who was in but basically there's some evidence that maybe it could be the lower educated junior workforce that benefits the most from tools such as generative AI, because it gets them up to speed much quicker, whereas the experienced ones, they're actually the ones that the AI was trained on, so they're not going to get the same type of marginal benefit. And so when you think about how this plays out organizationally, that has implications for how the future of work might play, and that was not spoken about at all. And in terms of sort of specific professions like the medical community, the legal community, the accounting community, and so forth, there was not much talk at all about the type of things that could be either replaced or augmented. There was some talk about augmentation, but not a lot of real insights like you mentioned. So it felt, it was a really sexy title, but you left away.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping, if I can tell you what I was kind of hoping for.
Yeah.
So there's a definite thing that kind of with AI in the mix, like doctors are now relying on diagnostic assistance at least. So if you break your rib, right, do you want AI being involved in diagnosing how many ribs are broken, how they should be treated, or do you want that involved and stuff, that kind of almost collaborative interaction between a doctor and the AI in looking at x-rays and stuff, that like a little bit of a critical review, but I don't think we heard anything towards that depth, or a lawyer, you know, relying on AI, or a judge, or you know, what in the legal system and stuff, you know. So no critical kind of thoughts in that mix.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I think I mean I'm not going to claim that either of us have the answer here, but you know they didn't even raise the question of like this paradox,
Yes,
which
but
is
we weren't
happening.
on the podium that day.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just to maybe close that this one section off.
Yeah.
I think it's just for our listeners just to be aware of, you know, I was sort of keen to hear how they were thinking about, you know, how, you know, let's say, so I just talked about some of the literature and research that's come out for how AI might augment our capabilities at the low, the up and coming junior workers, but it didn't talk so much about what could happen for the middle and the senior level workers and executives. And I think that was a missed opportunity. And I'm not saying that we have the answers here again, but you know, one of the things you can think about is that, you know, at the higher end, you know, there have been some studies that show that you can improve, you know, if you know what type of processing, this may be a podcast for another day, but if you can identify, and this was something done recently with MIT and BCG and some other, you know, companies, where basically if the senior executives did know where AI could be properly used, they improved their productivity by 20 to 30%. But if they weren't told anything, or they didn't know where AI could be, where the best use case or where the best use of time, they had a decrease in productivity by 10 or 20%. Now, don't quote me exactly on this, but that's the rough idea. And it would have been nice for to be more of talk, especially because you had leadership coming here, you had senior people at tech companies and senior execs from the incumbents here. It would have been nice to have that conversation, understand how do board members, how do leadership think about these type of problems.
Definitely something to be continued maybe another day.
Yeah.
So, and then we went to this expo, which is a humongous room, right, with for example a segment of the room where you saw pretty confused people with dozens of VR headsets, engaging with like experiences, games, and showrooms, from what I gathered and stuff. So there was a big section like with tons of VR headsets. Then I saw a drone that was a prototype. I'm showing it to you here.
Nice.
That was actually meant to be like an air taxi, flying. Yeah. And I went to a talk later on, so that was kind of cool, and raised the concern maybe, but also inspired me a little bit. If I look at Sydney traffic today, and I'm looking forward to 10 years from now, and I see these people that are driving on our streets right now, flying little manned drones through the air, I'm a little concerned. But so that talk actually provided some comfort that in the future, when it comes to air taxis, there will probably only be licensed pilots and autonomous vehicles in the airspace above Sydney, which was kind of a little bit comforting.
Yes.
That there's no casual kind of people who hop into their drone
like me
or me,
yes.
and fly around Sydney and stuff. And then of course there was this Amazon analytics session where you could you've experienced this. I just saw it. You experienced it in person. How was the real time video analytics on your basketball?
Oh yeah,
because you're a hobby.
Yeah,
right?
Yes. I play hoops as just as a hobby with some of the faculty here. No, it was great. I have a video of it if you want to ever use it. I did terrible.
Do you want to say for the listeners where they can maybe access that video? Or?
Yeah, maybe we'll put it in the show notes afterwards.
Okay.
But basically, yeah, it was real time analytics, and they were able to show how you could do AI computing at what they call at the edge, just meaning instead of at the cloud, they put it, right at the edge of the hardware. So they had this device called a Raspberry Pi, which could capture the motion of the basketball towards the hoop, and then using the hardware computing at the edge, meaning like on premise versus in the cloud, they could then compute and predict, where your shot was going to go, and sort of, any feedback that you might have to improve your shot based on the velocity, the ejection angle, and sort of the arc of your curve into the hoop. So if you're interested, Dirk, I was only a 33% shooter. I had 1 out of 3 shots.
Okay.
But I had my suit on, and I was not properly warmed up, so I have some extenuating circumstances for the poor free throw shooting.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So take the suit off.
Yes, next time.
Off you and watch out, MJ. Right.
Yes. Exactly.
Right. So another thing I wanted to talk about, I wanted to look over the Tasmanian Sea a little bit because
Sure.
I did attend a talk on venture capital in New Zealand. How long do we have in this one? Maybe we'll do a second one. How long do we have in this one, you reckon?
I have about 5 minutes left.
Okay,
yeah.
so let's So I'll touch on this and then maybe you wrap it up with the last
Sure.
talk. So one thing that the VC scene in New Zealand actually inspired me a little bit. It's kind of a cool approach because it's not that, it felt almost like a really healthy approach to investing and stuff. And to give you some of the numbers that I heard about is that the some of the VCs over there are actually happy with a $40 million exit, which is almost peanuts if you talk to people in the Silicon Valley.
Those are rounding errors for yes.
Exactly. So, but that's and the love and attention that they give their companies and stuff in New Zealand, like those small companies in Auckland and stuff, it feels like a very kind of healthy, caring approach to venture capitalism, which I think maybe this could become one model to look at if you want to make this whole play a little more ethical and a little more sustainable and a little healthier, in all aspects of the game and stuff. So that was kind of really surprising. Very kind of pragmatic people with a very healthy sense of, hey, we don't need those humongous return numbers, the 10x and all that stuff. We need to start a fund every 3 years and stuff, and we don't need that. They're not looking for this one unicorn necessarily, and they're not aggressively chasing that, but they're happy if there's a handful of companies coming out of that one round, and they're happy if they all come out at $40 million exits and stuff. And it just gave me a little bit of a warm fuzzy about this scene, to be honest.
Wow, I'm thank you for sharing that. No, I didn't realize that was going on, and I think there is an emerging narrative, just to close this out, that maybe the Silicon Valley VC, techno VC ecosystem might be broken, as we've seen, and so there might need to be some new models that emerge.
So I think, closing thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah, hear from you.
Yeah, closing thoughts. I think it was a great week. Like I told you before, I think just from a lay person's point of view, I took my kids there. They enjoyed it, and just to see some of the exhibitions there. But I think, just from a technology point of view, I think it was really good to see that both large organizations and startups were sort of sharing some of the up and coming and or cutting edge things that were happening. I forgot to do a little shout out to CSIRO, our Australian innovation organization, government led. They've got some really interesting science and research that's coming out, and they told me about one of their homegrown deep tech startups. I think it was called V2, growing some form of I was inundated with startups here, but I think they're doing some type of either plant-based type of food business, and I think they went, from initial investments, just of like $2 million, and now I think there's some, they're valued as some of the hundreds of millions, and so it was just really nice to hear like a homegrown story here that came from scientists, technologists, and it's also helping our environment. And I think that was actually one of the themes that we didn't get to talk too much about on sustainability. There were quite a few talks on sustainability, which were also quite interesting. But I think the concern there at the moment is just there's not been a cohesive effort among all industry players. I think everybody's doing some piece of it, but there's not been some thematic huge impact that I've seen yet.
Yeah. And I think everybody's subscribing to the fact, almost subconsciously, that digital and technology is kind of the catalyst in a more sustainable life, and we see that. I mean, like the initial thought about for something like Uber's business model was like, we're gonna raise the capacity utilization of our cars and stuff if we do that, and turn that into an environmental benefit. The way it has played out is a different way, but the initial thought, and in those ways, obviously tech and digital can be a huge catalyst, but we're not making the connections in strong enough a way
at the moment.
We should at the moment. Yeah.
Yes,
so definitely can second that.
I completely agree with that, and I think that was. But I think the big inspiration that I took away from it is just the energy there, just from the so many different dimensions, from the technology lens, from the industry lens, from the music and the film scene. I heard Nicole Kidman was there, but I wasn't able to see it.
I kind of saw her walking by.
Oh, you did? Okay. Okay.
She didn't recognize me.
Oh, she recognized you.
No.
You didn't give a little hug.
Yeah.
No, but I think overall, I left coming away, refreshed and sort of had a renewed sense of, oh wow, Sydney and Australia is really an exciting place to be at the moment.
Yeah, I will say this for those of you who've never been down to the harbor and stuff. It's kind of a cool area to hang out. Also,
yes.
like food scene wise and stuff. We found some nice little nooks to hang out and stuff.
Yes.
And it's beautiful down there. It's not. It's a good experience overall. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening today. I'm gonna say thanks.
And thank you, Dirk.
Yeah, thank you for joining me, Lamont. And if you like this, maybe smash the like button or put a little note in the comments and stuff, and maybe we'll make this a habit every now and then, come together and talk tech and talk developments every now and then. Thank you.